defied out of spite. A juicy double hit of malicious compliance. Recently, my wife pulled off such a delicious act of malicious compliance that I decided to combine it with her previous episode from about 6 months ago. My wife works in the finance department of a government contractor. They have a hybrid format, but mostly everyone works from home due to limited office space. Although her team is expected to be in the office on Mondays and Tuesdays. In this position, she has a very hectic end of the month every month. The whole team is closing out the numbers, and she often has to stay late in the evenings or work a couple of hours on the weekend to get everything finalized. This is important for understanding what comes next. Because of the terrible traffic on the roads, she prefers to start work at 7 and finish at 3 o'clock. That way, the commute takes 30 minutes instead of an hour or more each way, which she would otherwise spend just sitting in traffic jams. About 6 months ago, the management introduced a rule of strict working hours from 8 to 16 for office days and at the same time increased the total number of days when it is necessary to come to the office. My wife wrote them a letter, explaining that having to spend another 4 or 5 unnecessary hours in traffic every week takes away her ability to remain flexible in the evenings and on weekends. The management's response, be a team player, blah blah blah. Then my wife sent them a detailed breakdown of her paid 40 hours per week and explained how the flexibility in the work schedule that emerged since COVID had benefited the entire team. But if this flexibility is cut back, then naturally it also affects her own ability to adapt. Management still insisted on their decision. As a result, she left the office strictly at the end of her official hours, got stuck in traffic, and of course, missed the daily evening Teams call. Naturally, management didn't like this, but she had their own emails with the requirement in hand. She can't control the traffic, and they didn't want to reschedule the call. If they want her to participate in the call, then either they should give her back her previous schedule, or she'll stay for overtime and join the meeting from the office. In the end, they suggested that, for the foreseeable future, she return to her old schedule for the sake of team cohesion. And recently, the higher-ups decided that now all overtime must be approved by the immediate supervisor. Let's fast forward to last week. My wife started leaving meetings exactly at the scheduled time. She did this saying, "Sorry, I have a strict deadline," because her overtime hours hadn't been approved. Boom! And she leaves the call. Other employees picked up this habit as well. Her colleague also started finishing work right on time now because her overtime wasn't approved either. The senior leadership team, of course, was completely perplexed by the unfinished monthly reports and began demanding to know exactly what was going on. The team responded by referring to the directive about overtime. All overtime must be approved by the immediate supervisor. They weren't approved in advance, so I stopped working in order not to violate the new policy. My wife said that no one has responded to them about this yet, but it's already been several weeks. And all this is happening while the department still hasn't filled a position that's been open for 5 months. So in fact, they're working one person short. Now I really enjoy listening to her work stories and think that reading her this sub all these years has clearly done her good. 3 plus 3 plus 1.5 equals at most half an hour of work. A few years ago, one of my employer's major clients decided to open a new office in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was dispatched there for 3 weeks to set up the entire new space. They also sent a guy named Dave with me from the Chicago office of another division. I hadn't worked with him before, but I didn't like him from the very start. He was always at least 15 minutes late, moved like a zombie, and during the first week I caught him a couple of times falling asleep at work. And yet, he was the only person there I had any sort of interaction with. So I invited him to the bar on Friday for some drinks on the company tab. "I'd like to," he said, "but I'm going to go home and sleep until Monday. The commute is killing me. Wait, what? It turned out Dave's boss was a real jerk. And instead of paying for his plane ticket, hotel, and car rental like my boss did for me, his boss made him drive here from Chicago every time, which is almost 3 hours away. Me: "Dude, that's insane. You have to spend 6 hours a day just commuting?" Dave: "Yeah, it's brutal." Me: "Although the money's pretty good. So you end up working about 70 hours a week. That's rough. Just make sure you submit your receipts for gas and tolls as soon as possible. Last time, it took me almost a month to get reimbursed." I noticed the last spark in Dave's eyes finally went out. "Dave, they don't reimburse any of that." When I found out about this, I immediately called my boss, and he was just as shocked as I was. In our department, Dave would have been reimbursed for both travel time and all expenses, and we were both sure that this was a mandatory corporate policy, not something individual departments could just ignore. Unfortunately, neither my boss nor I could do anything about it, and neither of us knew much about Illinois or Indiana labor laws. So all we could do was advise Dave to keep his receipts for tax purposes and file a complaint with HR. On Monday, Dave was late again. After an hour, I started to worry and called him on his cell phone. "Dave, I just passed Portage. Strangely enough, I'm making pretty good time. I should be there in about 2 hours." Dave sounded completely content, so I figured he must have been forced to stop by the office before coming to us. Me. Alright, Dave, see you soon. He arrived a little after 11, and the first thing he did was take a 15-minute break. It was a long drive, I understood. After all, there was still almost a whole day ahead of us. After the break, Dave finally got down to business. He turned on the computer. He had barely logged into the system when he immediately stood up and announced he was going to lunch. Well, okay, he was clearly up to something, but I had no idea what exactly. After lunch, Dave finally got to work. He spent about 20 minutes reading emails, then stopped by my place. Dave. I'm going to take my second 15-minute break now, and then I'll head home. Me. What? Dave, grinning smugly. Don't worry, I talked to HR over the weekend. On Tuesday, I didn't see Dave at work. He wasn't answering calls, and neither I nor my boss could figure out what was going on with him. To be honest, we didn't really try that hard. After all, it's not our area of responsibility. Wednesday was the same. Oh well, maybe the guy just got sick. And then on Thursday, I finally saw him. It was before work, at breakfast in the hotel. Me. Dave, I was starting to get worried. You missed work 2 days in a row. Dave gave a knowing smirk. And after we filled our plates with tasteless scrambled eggs and burnt sausages, he told me the whole story. On Monday, the client noticed that he was coming in late, doing nothing, and leaving early, and called our company to complain. In response, Dave was called in for a disciplinary meeting with his manager and the local HR. They were ready to fire him for logging 32 hours of unjustified overtime last week and not working at all the previous day. According to Dave, they were taking it very seriously. A security staff member even came into the meeting and brought a box with his personal belongings from his desk. But Dave had a trump card. Actually, he had 3. A letter from his manager instructing him to travel to Fort Wayne every day at his own expense as a change of work location. First, a letter from corporate HR stating that although he is not required to take overtime, he is required to record all overtime worked, including travel to and from the client. Second, and a page from the internal employee handbook of his department. Third, where paid breaks outside the office were specified. After that, he told them that he was no longer going to work overtime, and after 3 hours of travel, one way, 1.5 hours of breaks, and 3 hours back, he had about half an hour a day left for actual work. Even less if you take traffic jams into account. Oh, and he also mentioned that corporate HR fully supports him. He had just spoken with them before the meeting. Dave. It took them about 3 seconds to realize they were screwed. And here I am, back in business. And by the way, since the company had to book everything at the last minute, I'm now staying in a suite with a jacuzzi, and my rental car is a freaking Cadillac. A difficult client insists on having her heavy sofa placed directly on the fragile wooden floor. Well, your wish is my command. Back when I worked in the warehouse, the customer service manager, who is still a great friend of mine, would sometimes ask me and a couple of other warehouse guys to help with redelivering and setting up a repaired or newly ordered sofa. On the day of the redelivery, the customer service manager, let's call him CSM, pulled me aside and warned me that the client was a very difficult and aggressive woman. This time, she had ordered a high-quality leather sofa, paid a ton of money, waited 22 weeks, and when it was delivered, she said she didn't like the color. Normally, the company doesn't arrange a replacement order if the client simply changes their mind about the color. But this lady caused such a scene and complained so much that the CEO made an exception for her. So we arrived at the location, and the driver was already unloading the sofa. The client had chosen a huge 3-seater sofa bed with a metal frame and a lower base. Usually, this kind of metal construction comes with special plastic pads for each leg and every metal edge to prevent damage to the floor. We carefully brought the sofa into the living room, but she immediately started loudly complaining that we were dirty idiots, lazy, and too slow. We started unpacking the sofa, and the lady got even more furious, starting to nag the team leader. And how much longer is this going to take? The team leader calmly replied that we were working carefully to make sure the sofa was in perfect condition. That's when we noticed that she had light-colored wooden parquet flooring, so I immediately started putting protective pads on the legs. The client screamed, "Why is he touching my sofa? Is he trying to break it?" Me, "No ma'am, I'm just..." Client, "Don't talk to me. Get your dirty hands off my sofa." Me, "I just need a couple of seconds to put on the rubber pads." Client, "Put my sofa on the floor right now, or I'll call the manager." I looked at the MPC and he just shrugged. We put the sofa directly on the floor and immediately heard it scraping. The MPC handed her the papers. She signed that the delivery was successful, that the sofa was assembled correctly and placed exactly where she wanted. The lady smiled smugly and plopped down on the sofa. There was a terrible scraping sound. The metal frame pressed into her wooden floor, and meanwhile, we gathered up the packaging and headed back to the store. And guess what was waiting for us there? A complaint from the client. According to her, we had damaged her very expensive wooden floor. The incident report showed that the client herself had signed the papers confirming the successful redelivery and that the sofa was installed according to her requirements and in the exact spot she indicated. She got exactly what she asked for. Bring me a burger with everything on it. My first job was as a waitress at a 1950s-style American diner. I think I was about 16 at the time. It was a cool job. Most of my coworkers were nice and the customers were hit or miss. We had this one homeless guy who came in all the time and did our food challenge every single week for a free meal. He was a fun guy. Alright, let's get to the story. One time, a family came in. The classic dad, mom, and 2 kids. All the tables and the bar counter were full. I came over to take their order, and the dad says, "I'll have a burger." Me, "What's on your burger?" Dad, "Everything." Me, "We have many options." I pointed to the topping menu. Dad glanced over it too fast to read anything. He looked at me and said, "Dad, everything on it." Actually, we had a huge selection. Their site lists: mustard, onions, coleslaw, chili, mayo, ketchup, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, jalapenos, mushrooms, onions, and bell peppers. Back then, it was even bigger. Plus, there were 4 or 5 types of cheese. I asked my dad several times if he was sure about his decision. I even tried to list the toppings. His wife also tried to explain the situation. It was clear that it annoyed him, but I completely understood that he had no idea what a burger with everything actually meant. In the end, I took his words at face value and moved on to the rest of the order. "Want cheese?" Dad, "Everything." Me, "We've got 4 kinds. All of them, that's brutal." I want to point out that at that moment he was literally shouting, "There's a reason I used exclamation marks!" I finished taking the order. I remember that on the receipt, I made a special effort to write out each ingredient as clearly as possible. The receipts were small and each ingredient was marked with an abbreviation, so fitting everything in was not easy. I also wrote down absolutely every type of cheese. I knew that this nightmare would be sent back to the kitchen. I understood that what would come out on the plate would be an indescribable mess. But I was determined to give this person exactly what he asked for. The cooks looked at me with a "Are you serious?" expression. I just nodded, giving them the green light. With the cheekiest grin, I brought the man his burger. There was about 1 kilogram of wet, slimy mush. The look on the man's face was priceless, but as expected, he immediately called the manager and started complaining. The manager came up to me in a rage. It was obvious that he had just been severely reprimanded. "You know you're supposed to ask what customers want on their burger." I did ask. Me, "The man at table 11 said he didn't order that." I'd like to remind you that at that time I was still only 16 years old. I was a timid girl, but I still managed to pull myself together and explain the situation. The manager's expression changed, and a slight smirk appeared on his face. He asked me to come with him to the table and grabbed a menu on the way. Manager, "Hello, sir. I need to clarify something. What exactly did you ask to be added to your burger?" Client, Everything, but..." The manager opens the menu on the table, pointing to the list of toppings. Manager, "Sir, this is everything. This is exactly what's in your burger. I'll be happy to make you a new one the way you want it if you specify this time, but we're very busy, so you'll have to wait a long time. Calls my name. Please take his order." I took the order. I don't remember what he ordered, but it was definitely a regular burger. It took about 10 minutes to prepare, so his family had almost finished eating by the time he was just starting. We could have just brought him a fresh burger that was already waiting in the queue. But why make a reasonable table with polite customers wait? A student issued an ultimatum about the project and paid dearly for it. One of the modules in my course is group work on a programming project. Nothing overly complicated, but the goal of the module is to develop skills that will actually be useful if the student goes into IT later. After all, if you're studying computer science, it makes sense that you plan to work in this field, right? So, I have this one student, a walking disaster with a crown on his head. He uses neural networks for almost all his assignments, and it's obvious to anyone. Anytime he gets written feedback, he immediately starts arguing. But as soon as you sit him down and ask him to explain his own code, that's it. He's lost. He doesn't understand half of what he turned in at all. For this project, he came up to me and said, "I can't work with others in a group, I'll work alone." I explained that the module includes specific group activities and criteria for which I award points, and I need to see his contribution to the group. I'm not allowed to exempt him from group work, but he was absolutely adamant, so I decided to accommodate him. Okay, work alone. All of the students were assigned to specific groups, and every single week I checked on their individual progress. This guy stubbornly refused to interact with the rest of the group, and since I had formally granted his request, he worked on his own project entirely alone. At every stage of the interim feedback, I kept telling him that he needed to join the group, otherwise he risked failing the module. I sent him all these comments both in paper form and by email with a read receipt. I saved all the screenshots. The end of the module came, and it was time to submit the assignments. As expected, the student submitted a project consisting solely of his own work without any interaction with the group. But there were several problems. Most seriously, his project failed the requirements. The code didn't perform the required tasks. This led to a point deduction. Since he didn't participate in group work, he lost all points for the group component. Because his code deviated so much from the specification, I called him in for an oral code review so he could explain what he had written. He demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of his own code. Another deduction in points. The final grade for the work is a big fail. Now he has to retake the entire module. There is, however, one bit of bad news for me personally. During the retake, this guy will be in my group again. I need this report earlier. I work in a scientific laboratory and usually we prepare the daily report at around 1400 when all the analyses are already finished and we leave work at 1530. The boss of our boss, who mainly handles administration and management, works from 9 to 17. And now this boss of our boss wants to receive the report somehow, almost magically, much earlier, even before we finish the testing. He comes into the lab with the report in hand and says, essentially conveying the main gist of his demand, I need you to submit this report earlier. You always bring it when the day is almost over, and I can't change anything. I need to know what's going on in advance, so I can make any necessary adjustments or changes. Bring it at 11 in the morning. I tried to explain that the report is prepared at 2 o'clock because that's when all of the required data has finally been collected. If I do it earlier, it will be incomplete, he asked. And which data will be missing? I pointed to the sections, this one and this one. He replied, oh, that's not important. We don't change anything based on that data anyway. Then I asked him to send me an official letter with this request for me and the other employees so we wouldn't forget about the new instruction. He said he would. The guy went back to his office and actually sent the letter. I'm in shock. I clarified this point with my direct supervisor. She smiled too, fully understanding what would happen next. Throughout the entire month, we strictly followed his instructions, submitted the report at 11, and simply left out 2 unimportant indicators every day because the tests weren't finished by that time and there just physically wasn't any data. The whole laboratory took part in this. And then the end of the month came. The boss sat down to type up his monthly compliance report and discovered a huge empty section spanning 2 pages. He didn't understand what was going on. And it was already 3:30 p.m. We had already left. And instead of printing and filing the documents in 5 minutes like he did every month, he had to search for where those 2 indicators were kept. The boss's boss had to stay late on the last day of the month to fill out the report. My boss ignored his calls for several hours, but by 7 o'clock she finally answered and told him where he could find the necessary data. Everything in the lab is labeled. He could have figured it out himself. As a result, he sat there until 8 in the evening, entering the data by hand. The IT department wanted a separate ticket for each subdirectory. I work at a power electronics company. The company has been around for about 40 years, and about 10 years ago, it was bought by an American global conglomerate, which brought along its own international IT support service. My role in this giant global machine is simple. I fix the units that customers break. These could be devices that broke 2 months after purchase, or ancient relics that no one has looked at for 20 years and which have been worn out by continuous use during that time. And so, because of one such battered old unit, I had to engage in a life-or-death battle with the IT department in their tech support version. I needed technical specifications, schematics, and testing documents for an old, discontinued model that was created in an era when engineers drew diagrams with pencils and rulers. In other words, nothing particularly secret. So, I got in touch with the veterans who have been working here since the days of Fred Flintstone, and they directed me to an old archive that was once assembled and preserved among terabytes of documentation on the company server. The path looked something like company, our product, our test, VCRM. Of course, I didn't have access to it. I sent a request to IT and got a response a week later. After consulting with the global IT director, I was granted access to company product, test, VCRM, Charta XR series. Well, that's great. Except that's not the product series I have on my desk. Besides, they only gave me access to the root folder, not to all its subdirectories. As a result, I got access to the list of folders, literally nothing else. I had already lost a week, so I replied as politely as I could, without sarcasm, something like, thank you so much, but I need access to the entire directory and to all subdirectories within each series. They replied, unfortunately, you need to submit a separate ticket for each file path according to IT policy and data protection initiatives. Alright then, as you wish, here's what you asked for. Making sure I understood them correctly, I started churning out tickets as fast as the lousy IT web client could handle. I copied and pasted the same text, only changing the folder path. First, for all the subdirectories inside the XR series, about 12 of them. Then, assuming the structure was the same for the other product series, I started requesting access to those series as well, and to all their folders. Naturally, I turned off Outlook because each ticket sent me 2 emails, one for ticket creation and one for ticket assignment. And also because I thought it would be funny if they couldn't get in touch with me. After a while, my manager came to me and told me to stop teasing IT. He got a call and was told that, apparently, having so many open tickets would ruin their metrics and KPIs. In the end, it turned out that the IT employee had misinformed me, and in fact, only 1 ticket was needed. Hooray! It took me about an hour of mindless work to get the IT department to the point where they finally just gave up. So, I can't order the drink you're advertising even though you have the ingredients? Alright, I'm from the UK. Once I was with friends at a well-known coffee chain. I won't say which one exactly, but the name sounds like cost a lot. This was a few days after Christmas last year. That's an important detail for context. When the barista started serving me, it was immediately clear that I was in for an interesting experience. This guy acted arrogantly, spoke with disdain, and looked as if he considered himself a prince among commoners. He had long bangs that he kept flicking away from his eyes, which were full of contempt. It was obvious that he didn't want to work or interact with people like me. We were both uncomfortable. There was only one employee on shift. He was both taking orders and making the drinks, so whatever anyone ordered, he would have to make it himself. It was the very beginning of January, but the coffee shop still had up advertising posters for the Christmas seasonal drinks. I love unusual flavors of coffee and hot chocolate, and the menu had a Black Forest, hot chocolate with dark chocolate, cherry, and cream flavor. That's what I ordered. The barista looked me over and said disdainfully, "That's a Christmas drink." Me, "Yes." Barista, "Christmas is already over." Me, "Yes." The barista smirking, "That's why I can't make you a Christmas drink." Me, "But you're advertising it and you have all the ingredients for it behind the counter. Black Forest is just syrup plus hot chocolate with whipped cream on top. It's no more complicated than regular hot chocolate. It's literally just regular hot chocolate plus syrup." The barista rolling his eyes, "It's not available right now." I couldn't tell if he was just acting important, being lazy, or if there really was some directive from management about the menu. So I decided to test him and ask a leading question. Me, "Alright, then can I order a shot of some syrup? The board says they're 35 pence each." The barista dismissively, "I don't see any reason why not." Me, "Then can I have a shot of cherry syrup, but in a medium-sized takeaway cup?" The barista clicked his tongue, silently took a cup, poured the syrup in, and set it down in front of me with contempt. "Anything else?" he asked through gritted teeth. And that's when my triumphant malicious compliance with the rules began. I slid the cup back and said, "Could you please make me a medium hot chocolate in this cup, stir it well, and then add whipped cream?" The barista grimaced. He realized that I had strictly followed his own rules and still got my Black Forest hot chocolate. I stood there watching him make it with such reluctance and resentment as if every second of the process caused him pain. For the record, the drink turned out to be really tasty. Thank you so much for watching. Share your own stories of malicious compliance in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other videos. Hugs. See you tomorrow. Bye.